The battle for Harrison Homestead. Standing my ground against a powerful homeowners association cost me more than just peace of mind. It nearly cost me my freedom. The moment the sheriff slapped handcuffs on my wrist for refusing to sell the only family farm standing between wealthy developers and their expansion plans, neither of us knew how quickly the tables would turn. What happens when corrupt officials try to arrest the wrong military family son on his own land? I never expected at 40 years old that I'd be fighting to save my family's legacy. This land has been in the Harrison family for 3 generations, ever since my grandfather purchased these 40 acres after returning from World War II. The white farmhouse with a wraparound porch isn't just a house, it's where I grew up, watching my father leave for military deployments and where I decided to put down my own roots. My father took a different path than his father. Instead of farming, he pursued a military career that eventually led him to the Pentagon. Growing up, I saw him only during brief leaves between assignments. While he was commanding troops overseas, I was learning to tend crops and fix fences under my grandfather's watchful eye. When Grandpa passed 5 years ago, I left my construction job in the city and moved back to take over the farm. My father supported my decision, even though he probably hoped I'd follow him into military service. "Someone needs to keep the family land," was all he said when I told him my plans. Everything changed last spring when bulldozers appeared just beyond my property line. Mountain Ridge Estates, they called it. Within months, massive homes with manicured lawns surrounded my farm on 3 sides. The contrast was jarring, my weathered barn and tractor parts against their stone facades and infinity pools. I first noticed the stairs when I'd drive my tractor along the shared road. The new neighbors would wrinkle their noses at the occasional farm smell or the dirt my tires left behind. I didn't think much of it then. Live and let live, that's always been my philosophy. Then the letters started arriving. First from the county, then from something called the Mountain Ridge Homeowners Association. Apparently, my property was now considered an area of concern. 5 years farming this land without issue, and suddenly I'm a problem that needs solving. I should have seen the warning signs. The way county officials who'd known me for years suddenly couldn't look me in the eye at the general store, the whispers that stopped when I entered the diner in town. Something was happening behind the scenes, and I was the last to know that my little piece of America had become the final obstacle in someone else's grand plan. The black SUV kicked up dust as it rolled down my drive one Tuesday morning. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, looking completely out of place among my chicken coops and hay bales. He introduced himself as Robert Wilson, president of the Mountain Ridge HOA. His handshake was firm but cold. "Beautiful piece of history you have here," he said, though his eyes were assessing, not admiring. "I'm sure you're aware of the changes happening in this area." Wilson unfolded a large map across my kitchen table. The colorful rendering showed luxury homes, a community center, tennis courts, and a large swimming pool, all surrounding a conspicuously blank space in the shape of my farm. "We're creating the most exclusive community in the county," Wilson explained. "Property values have already doubled since we broke ground. The only issue is..." He pointed to my property on the map. "Your farm is becoming increasingly incompatible with the community aesthetic." I sipped my coffee, saying nothing. "The HOA board has authorized me to make you an offer," Wilson continued, sliding a document across the table. The number was substantial, but barely 60% of what developers were paying for similar acreage in the county. "This is considerably below market value," I pointed out. Wilson's smile tightened. "We're accounting for the costs of demolition and remediation. Your structures aren't up to code, and there are environmental concerns with the agricultural usage." "My family has farmed this land for 3 generations," I said firmly. "It's not for sale at any price." He seemed genuinely surprised. People like Wilson weren't used to hearing no. "I understand sentimentality," he said condescendingly, "but you're a practical man. You must see that progress is inevitable. This area is changing. Then it can change around me." Wilson's friendly facade cracked slightly. "Mr. Harrison, I should mention that as this community develops, county ordinances regarding noise, smell, and appearance will be more strictly enforced. Farming is becoming impractical here. Those ordinances have exemptions for established agricultural properties," I countered. I've already checked. His eyebrows raised slightly, reassessing me. Well, regulations change. The county commission is very supportive of our development. Before leaving, Wilson placed his business card on the table. My offer stands for 30 days. After that, I can't guarantee the same terms. I hope you'll reconsider, for your own sake. As his SUV disappeared down my driveway, I found myself wondering if I should call my father. At 59, General James Harrison now commanded significant resources at the Pentagon. A single phone call from him could probably make this problem disappear. But I'd always been determined to solve my own problems. When I declined to enter the military academy at 18, choosing agricultural college instead, I'd promised myself I wouldn't rely on my father's position. This farm was my responsibility, not his. I tucked Wilson's card into my junk drawer and went back to repairing my irrigation system. Whatever game the HOA was playing, I wasn't about to forfeit my family's legacy without a fight. The next few weeks brought a steady escalation. First came the noise complaints when I started my tractor before 7 a.m., something I'd done for years without issue. Then the county animal control officer appeared, responding to anonymous concerns about my livestock's welfare. The HOA's tactics became increasingly transparent. Whenever I drove through the new development, security vehicles would follow me. Residents would pointedly hold their noses or cover their children's eyes as if my pickup truck might contaminate them. Wilson returned 3 times, each visit with a slightly better offer and considerably more pressure. The board is getting impatient, he warned during his last visit. They've invested too much to let one stubborn farmer derail the community plan. The breaking point came when I discovered a connection I should have seen sooner. Sheriff Mike Carter, who'd recently been elected with substantial donations from local businesses, was Wilson's brother-in-law. More troublingly, Carter had purchased 3 lots in the new development at suspiciously below market prices. I first noticed the sheriff's involvement when he personally responded to a noise complaint about my rooster. Standing in my barnyard in his pressed uniform, he seemed more concerned with surveying my property than addressing the complaint. "You know, Harrison," he said, thumbs hooked in his belt loops, "I've got friends asking why you're being so difficult. This development is good for the county. More tax revenue, better services." "My family has been paying taxes here for 70 years, I replied. "Never heard complaints before." The sheriff shrugged. "Times change. Young farmers like you need to change with them." Or, he let the sentence hang unfinished. After he left, my neighbor Ed Johnson came by. Ed's farm had been bought out the previous year. "Be careful, Tom," he warned. Before I sold, I had 3 health inspections for building code violations and a sudden issue with my water rights. Sheriff Carter delivered each notice personally. The pattern became clear when I received a certified letter citing agricultural runoff concerns that required expensive water quality testing. The environmental officer who came to collect samples wore a Mountain Ridge Estates cap. That evening, I caught teenagers from the development throwing rocks at my chickens. When I called the sheriff's office, the dispatcher informed me that unfortunately, all deputies were busy with higher priority calls. I considered calling my father again that night. As a 4-star general currently overseeing joint operations at the Pentagon, he had connections that could shut down this harassment with a single phone call. But our relationship had always been complicated. After my mother died when I was 12, he'd buried himself in his military career, while I stayed with my grandparents on the farm. We respected each other's choices, but rarely asked for help. Instead, I called a local attorney who specialized in property disputes. Her advice was sobering. "They're building a paper trail to force you out. It's happening all over the county. Small farmers getting squeezed by developers with deep pockets and deeper political connections." As I hung up, I realized this wasn't just about my farm anymore. This was about whether money and influence could override generations of history and hard work. I wasn't just fighting for my land. I was fighting for everyone who'd ever had something that someone more powerful wanted to take. Sheriff Carter's cruiser rolled down my driveway exactly 1 month after Wilson's first visit. I was splitting firewood when he arrived, and I didn't put down my axe immediately, a small act of defiance that didn't go unnoticed. "Morning, Harrison," he called, sunglasses reflecting my weathered barn. Got a minute to talk? I embedded the axe in the chopping block and wiped my hands. Seems like you've made the time. The sheriff surveyed my property with exaggerated attention. Noticed you've got quite a few situations developing here. Situations: agricultural waste management violations, unpermitted structures, outdated electrical systems. He ticked each item off on his fingers. The county has been lenient with you out of respect for your family's history here, but there are limits to what we can overlook. I matched his gaze. Funny how these situations only became issues after luxury homes started popping up. Carter removed his sunglasses, his expression hardening. I've been authorized to give you one final opportunity to resolve this amicably. The HOA's offer has been increased by 10%. That's more than generous considering the remediation costs they'll incur. Not interested, I said flatly. The sheriff sighed, as if genuinely disappointed. Tom, we grew up together. This isn't personal, but the county commissioners have unanimously approved the rezoning of this entire area for residential development. Your agricultural exemptions expire at the end of the month. That's not legal. I wasn't notified of any rezoning hearings. Notices were published according to county requirements. His smile was thin. Not our fault if you don't read the legal sections of newspapers. He handed me an official-looking document. This is a preliminary assessment of the violations on your property. Conservative estimate for bringing everything up to code is just under $200,000. The number was deliberately impossible, more than the farm's entire annual income. You've got 48 hours to accept the HOA's offer before I start writing citations, Carter said. Each violation carries daily fines. At some point, those fines exceed property value, and the county forecloses. The threat hung in the air between us. This wasn't law enforcement. It was extortion wearing a badge. I considered mentioning my father then, letting slip that General James Harrison might take an interest in apparent corruption targeting his son. But I'd never used my father's position for personal advantage before, and I wasn't about to start now. My grandfather once told me, I said instead, that the measure of a community isn't how it treats its newest members, but how it respects its oldest traditions. Carter's face flushed. He knew who my father was, even if he'd underestimated my connection to him. Your grandfather isn't here, he snapped. And traditions change when they get in the way of progress. 2 days, Harrison. Then things get complicated. As his cruiser disappeared down my drive, I looked at the ultimatum in my hands. They had all the power, the law, the money, the connections. All I had was this land and a stubborn streak as deep as the soil beneath my feet. That and one phone call I'd hoped I'd never have to make. The next morning, I discovered my fence cut in 3 places along the property line shared with the development. My cattle had wandered onto their perfectly landscaped common area, trampling flower beds and leaving distinctive patties on the walking path. Before I could round them all up, Wilson appeared with his phone out, documenting everything. This is exactly the kind of irresponsible farming we've been concerned about, he announced loudly to the gathering residents. Livestock roaming free, damaging private property. I didn't bother explaining about the cut fence. They wouldn't believe me anyway. That afternoon, Sheriff Carter returned with a deputy to investigate the livestock incident. He walked the property line, taking photos of what he called insufficient fencing and inadequate livestock management. Mighty convenient timing, I observed. Carter ignored the comment. I'll need to file an animal control report. If it happens again, your livestock will be impounded. After they left, I repaired the fence, using heavy chains where the wire had been cut. 3 hours later, my neighbor Ellie Baker called. Tom, you need to know what's happening, she said in a hushed voice. There's an emergency HOA meeting tonight about your farm. My husband's on the board. He said they're calling it a health and safety crisis. I thanked her for the warning, though I wasn't surprised. The playbook was becoming clear: manufacture crisis, document everything, build a paper trail, then use the legal system to force compliance. That evening, I drove past the development's clubhouse. Luxury cars filled the parking lot. Through the large windows, I could see Wilson standing at a podium, gesturing at enlarged photos of my farm projected on a screen. Sheriff Carter stood nearby, arms crossed, adding official weight to the proceedings. Back home, I began organizing decades of property records, permits, and tax documents. If this was headed where I suspected, I'd need evidence of my own. Just after midnight, I heard engines on my access road. Grabbing my flashlight, I caught two men in dark clothing tampering with my irrigation ditch. They fled when my light hit them, but the damage was done. They diverted water away from my fields toward the development's decorative pond. I didn't bother calling the sheriff. Instead, I set up game cameras at strategic points around my property. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd at least document the game. The next morning brought more concerned officials. This time, a county building inspector who cited my barn for violations that had never been issues during previous inspections. The environmental officer returned, taking soil samples from areas suspiciously close to where my cattle had been contained after the fence cutting. As I watched them leave, I finally made a decision I'd been avoiding. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about justice. My father had spent his entire career defending American rights and values. If anyone would understand the principle at stake here, it would be him. I pulled out my phone and found his private number, not his Pentagon office, but the direct line he'd given me for emergencies. This wasn't how I wanted to reconnect with my father, but sometimes you need to recognize when you're outgunned and call for reinforcements. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. 3 days after the ultimatum, Sheriff Carter's cruiser roared down my driveway, lights flashing. 2 deputy vehicles followed close behind. This wasn't a visit, it was a show of force. I was repairing my tractor when they arrived. Carter strode toward me, hand resting on his holster, deputies flanking him on either side. Thomas Harrison, he announced formally, I have multiple warrants related to violations of county ordinances, environmental regulations, and animal welfare statutes. He held up a thick stack of papers. These include failure to maintain agricultural waste systems, unauthorized water diversion, improper livestock management, and operating unpermitted structures. This is harassment, and you know it, I said, wiping grease from my hands. I'm just enforcing the law, Carter replied, but his smirk told the real story. You had your chance to resolve this civilly. In the distance, I noticed Wilson and several HOA board members watching from luxury SUVs parked on the public road. They weren't even bothering to hide their involvement anymore. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, Carter ordered. On my own property? For what? Having a farm in farm country? For violations that pose a threat to public safety and environmental health, he snapped. Now turn around, or I'll add resisting arrest. Pride made me want to refuse, but strategy suggested compliance for now. I turned slowly, feeling cold metal close around my wrists with a definitive click. This is what happens to people who don't understand progress, Carter muttered, tightening the cuffs an extra notch. The moment the handcuffs locked, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about justice, about standing against corruption wearing a badge and calling itself progress. You have no idea what you've just done, I said quietly. Carter spun me around roughly. What I've done is enforce the law against a stubborn farmer who doesn't know when he's beaten. My neighbors had begun to gather at the sound of the sirens. Some looked shocked, others satisfied. The community I'd known my entire life was divided, watching as I was marched toward the sheriff's car in handcuffs. The county's filing for emergency condemnation of this property, Carter announced loudly, playing to his audience. Environmental hazards, structural dangers. This place isn't fit for habitation. As he gripped my arm to guide me toward his cruiser, our confrontation reached exactly the moment captured in the photograph, me shouting in protest, still handcuffed, while the sheriff restrained me in my own driveway. My white farmhouse and his patrol car forming the backdrop to this perversion of justice. What Sheriff Carter couldn't have known was that I'd finally made that phone call the night before, the one call I'd hoped I'd never need to make. I'd spoken directly to my father, General James Harrison, explaining everything that had